actually forget. I leave the inside. Okay, we can see focus on me instead. Okay, so first of all, thank you all very much for coming and having me here. It's really a delight to be here at JNU Academic, and I'm very important, great admirer of the work that you do. In fact, I watched some of your previous sessions with my friend Aditya and others, and I really want to express my gratitude to you for the invitation. I really want to thank Professor Chinnasri Dasgupta for being my discussion today. Other than some certain select greats like Pranab Bardhan and Francine Frankel, nobody has ventured so substantially into India's post-colonial political economy, and such is the importance of her intervention, which you should all read if you have. I know sometimes political science students don't read political economy, but they should. Sorry if I sound like an uncle. That if you read the footnotes of my book, you will see that state and capital and independent India is referenced throughout. And I think particularly on this question of Hindu-undivided family and also about transformation of Indian political economy in the 1970s. It talks about zones of intervention and non-intervention. A wonderful case study of the pharmaceutical industry. These are things that, you can't encounter anywhere else. People have maybe sometimes piously said, oh, we must study Hindu-undivided family as a vehicle of capital accumulation in certain culturalist frames. But she has actually demonstrated how this has taken place with numbers, which is something that, as an economic historian, I am delighted to see. And finally, I want to acknowledge JNU's own role in my own education, even though I never studied here, and only once visited to give a seminar at CPS actually in August 10th, 2016, where I presented what is Chapter 2, the early part of Chapter 2 of this book, and received wonderful questions. And I've learned a great deal from my PhD classmates who have done MA or MPhil at JNU, including some apostates who went from CPS to CHS. And also from historians who have trained at this august institution, including one of my key mentors, Professor Rajarathi, who, by the way, just to make a plug for him, has come out with a new book in January called Swadeshi Scheme about D.O. Chidambaram Pillai, which is very important in terms of tying the history of region and Indian nationalism to the history of political economy. And I think you'll all enjoy it. I have very little formal training in South Asian history or in historical methodology, just about one course. But while I was doing my PhD fieldwork in New Delhi, some of my friends were able to send me their phone recordings of the lectures for an MA option course called Caste, Community and Culture, an Alternative Intellectual History of India by MSS Pandian. And the famous methods lectures that people used to travel from North Campus to listen to, delivered by Nilavri Bhattacharya. I used to listen to them on my way to Nehru Memorial Library, and whenever I could hear about the volume of the horns and honking, and to NAI for my research, and they were an education of their own. Anyway, so maybe I've gone on for too long about that, and maybe I've prepared remarks about my book that are too short. So hopefully that may encourage you to read the book. But let's begin. I won't speak for too long, but I'll start by discussing maybe what motivated me to write the book, and then to give you a little bit of an overview of what it is about, and then conclude by suggesting what I think it offers us today. So on motivations. The abstract question that motivates toward a free economy, Swatantra and opposition politics in democratic India, is how can we better understand India's simultaneous escape from colonial economic stagnation and the persistence of the democratic form which was introduced to a largely poor and unlettered people. Right? This is a big question that is asked in many of these similarly titled Sudipto Kaviraj essays. Right? Dilemmas of democratic development, ideas of freedom, democracy and development. There's an alphabet soup of democracy and something essays. But a similar question is posed and asked. Right? So this is the major kind of headline question. Right, in the very abstract sense. So for most of this period, as you all know, the umbrella Indian National Congress has been in power in the center and at key states in the country's Westminster-style federal system, led by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, who was in office from 1947 to 1964, as you all know. The Congress introduced planned economic policy that sought to consolidate a heavy industrial public sector and to bring about what was called a socialistic pattern of society, right, rhetorically. The legacies of the Nehruvian era have loomed large, although some people have tried to erase them. And indeed, for most of India's post-colonial history, right, the dominant paradigm, right, was one of statist economic policy associated with central planning. Although, of course, the extent to which after the second five-year plan that was carried out was limited. But in contrast to that earlier era, the post-1991 period has been characterized by economic liberalization and private service sector-led growth. And actually, in the discussion before, Professor Dasgupta and I were talking a little bit about this film Band Baja Barak. So it's also about the way in which that liberalization set of things that were done have also manifested themselves among certain class and caste strata in a new kind of enterprise culture, so to speak, right? And sometimes that tends to get a lot of disproportionate emphasis in both in popular culture, but also in social science, especially in economics, right? With the neoclassics, I'm not talking about CSP, I'm talking about the other people, those who must not be named. So, accompanying this changing economic landscape, right, the right-wing internationalist politics of the BJP has come to dominate both the center and key states in the Indian political system. Right? In the states, regional and caste-based parties have asserted themselves increasingly, relative to 1947. You all know that, and Congress has been reduced, as we discovered again last week, to a shadow of itself. Right? And in much of social scientific literature, especially economics, this is 1991 and afterwards, is considered to be a sharp break from the past, not in Professor Dasgupta's work, but in a lot of others. Okay, but India was always a mixed economy of private and public sectors, with the majority of Indians engaged in informal private activity, right? And despite the dominance of the Congress, political opposition was given the space to emerge and advance alternate agendas. So, Toward a Free Economy argues that during the 1950s and 1960s, a non-sectarian, right-wing politics, embracing an alternative economic paradigm to planning, emerged in the form of the Swatantra or Freedom Parties. This was a politics associated with the keyword of free economy against the so-called socialist planned economy of the day. The emergence of free economy is driven by changes in Indian economy and society. Right? Its major ideological constituencies, I suggest, hail from landed and mercantile castes transitioning to new forms of economic activity in southern and western India, sort of crudely, large parts of which had been under the Rayatwari settlement in colonial India as part of Bombay and Madras presidencies. But of course, there are variations. So a lot of it is about saying that we are from Rayatwari area, saying that we are landowning, cultivating peasants, right? Because you don't want, because Zamindari abolition is okay, but bringing land ceilings to Rayatwari areas means that you, the rich peasant, are going to be negatively economically impacted, right? And so these communities include Kammas, Reddis, right, Gaundars from Tamil Nadu, or what is Madras presidency, Patidars, especially the Charota tract Patidars, Tamil Brahmins, right? So these are groups who Harish Damodaran calls India's new capitalists, but also Parsis, right? And not just Parsi big business. I'm also thinking about your, small shop owner in Bombay, this sort of thing, right? Or small parts of Gujarat. So, free economy's progenitors were not formal economists. Rather, they are politicians and publicists who had derived an economic common sense shaped by their experiences of regional and small town or Mufassal political economy. Right? And actually, I would suggest that in our everyday lives, the people who are communicating to us, right, our Prime Minister, regional politicians, people writing in newspapers, they're very often not trained in economics, but they're talking about Bhrashtachar, they're talking about inflation, they're talking about taxes, they're talking about vikas, all of that. And how do they formulate their ideas? It's trying to understand this sort of thing, right? That's what I mean when I say economic common sense. So the ideas of my protagonists expressed in various genres, right, from the cartoon to the short story about prohibition to the manifesto, right, to the campaign slogan, these ideas draw on idioms of anti-colonial nationalism and selectively interpret transnational currents of free market economic thinking. They take on meanings that vary by region and language and by caste and class. And the variety of these ideas encompass everything from a global system for coordinating agricultural prices so that developing agrarian nations are insulated from the vicissitudes of international markets, Credo of World Peasantry by N.G. Ranga, 1937. I would commend you all to read it. It's a really extraordinary thing to read. Everything from that to the regional cooperative experiment of the Kera District Cooperative Milk Producers Union, which is also known as AMUL. Right? But nevertheless, despite this diversity, there are four things that unite these varying visions. Lowest common denominator, you might say. Those are anti-communism, right? And when I say anti-communism, I don't mean against communists. I mean including a kind of argumentation, which is that look, today you have nationalized the airlines, tomorrow you're going to come for our heads, and that this one is going to slowly lead to the other, right? Just as Mao used to call certain people capitalist roaders, you can say that these are communist roaders. In other words, they're just going down the hill, and they're just going to reach the end quite quickly. So, anti-communism is one. The second is advocacy of unfettered private economic activity. Right? So, remove regulations. This kind of thing. Don't make me have to put together a license application in order to conduct my business. Right? Don't make it so cumbersome to get foreign exchange to import machinery. Third point, decentralized development. Plans are being made from Delhi, right, at the national level. There's a big imaginary, much maligned Nehru's ideas for big industrial development, but rather this is about the region, right, locality. Right? And then finally, the defense of private property. So, the movement for free economy takes institutional form as the Swatantra or Freedom Party, which rose and fell between 1959 and 1974. That movement was advanced through the Swatantra Party's project of what I have called opposition politics. And there are three elements of this which I think is distinctive. No single one I think is necessarily differentiates Swatantra from the others. If you take them together, here's where I think it's unique, and this is something that Rajni Kothari actually points out founder of CSDS points out in 1962, and that helps make politics more ideological. Anyway, so here are the three pillars, right? The first is opposition politics means presenting a conservative alternative to the Congress as salutary for the health of a post-colonial democracy with progressive ideals. Right? In other words, that even if your aim is progressive policy, it's useful to have something like this because it sort of helps via competition and pointing things out, etc., to kind of up the game of the alternative. And it is a distinct model from the one-party dominant system that is theorized by Kothari, which I assume you've all learned about, right, where you have your party of consensus, which is an umbrella party, right, the Congress, the grand old party, so to speak, and accommodates all kinds of diversity, and you have parties of pressure at the end that try to push the center of its agenda with outside chance of exit. Right? But rather what's happening is that the Congress right, or parts of the Congress right, are actually coming to a different party itself and trying to do things different very creatively to try to bring down the Congress. Right? So, the second point is opposition politics means bringing economic affairs into the domain of public consciousness and mobilizing people around these issues rather than the concerns of caste or religion. So that does not mean to say that they are egalitarian or they are necessarily secular. But the point is that the appeal that you make, right? The appeal that you make, the idiom of argumentation is never about Hindu Rashtra or anything like that, nor is it about about Jati or Varna. It is about free economy, occupation, this sort of thing, right? And of course, it is a discourse that pertains to and is accepted by a few people. It's not a mass effort, right? So, Swatantra seeks, as part of its educational mission, to get Indians to interpret economic considerations as part of their citizenly lives. Right? So, through its attempts at communication and mobilization, right? So, there's education, but there's communication and mobilization also as part of the second pillar of opposition politics. Swatantra offers Indians an alternative economic program and helps to entrench economic climb making as part of democratic practice. Right? So you actually have this phenomenon of these thousands and thousands of letters that are sent to Rajgopalachari, Sri Rajgopalachari and other party leaders in the village, from villages and small towns saying that, look, I need to build, I was supposed to be, given, permission to build this well or whatever, but it wasn't given, or bureaucrats interfering with my permission. Can you please, as a leader of opposition, bring some attention to this, right? So, people were making these kinds of claims before, writing petitions, you go back to Mughal era even before. But the point is that it is you as opposition leader, can you do this? And people are also writing to different kinds of leaders. They're writing to, identifying different kinds of political leaders at different scales and just trying to amplify their efforts potentially by sending to all kinds of different of politicians, but the opposition party is included as part of that. And also in other kinds of letters, you also see that in terms of people who are supporters of the party and this kind of thing, that there is some kind of an engagement with, if you guys come to power, maybe you could do a better job, this kind of thing. Right? So that's what I call about a certain kind of opposition consciousness. Right? And third, of course, opposition politics means using the institutions of India's tripartite system of government to check the power of the ruling party. Now, whether that means bringing cases to the Supreme Court through the sort of swashbuckling lawyer Nani Palkiwala, we have famously the bank nationalization case and the Privy Purses case, whether that means opposing the 17th Amendment and mobilizing people on marches, etc., across the country, or getting Swatantra's supporters who are lawyers to represent some of the party supporters in court on their right to property, whether that means in Parliament, right, raising the first successful no-confidence motion, right, this kind of thing, in order to make sure that you kind of create some balance. So sitting on parliamentary committees and saying, why does the Indian Statistical Institute get so many resources? Because that is their great enemy, because it is where, planning is essentially coming from, particularly the second 5-year plan, Maharogas, sort of thing, right? So, electorally, right, Swatantra reaches its apex in the 1967 elections, when it becomes the recognized opposition in Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan, and won 44 seats in the Lok Sabha, more than any other party. Right? But this is not the story of free economy so much. The electoral side and the ideas, platform side are a different one. Right? The electoral side is a little bit more of a sordid, or a much more sordid story of feudal vote banks being transferred. And the example that I discuss in the book is Maharani Gayatri Devi, right? Sort of legendary person, wins the most one-sided election in the history of democracy, and people say, oh wow, this is so glamorous, but really she goes out to these campaign speeches and all that and says, please vote for me, and then they say people say, oh yeah, we will, aren't we your subjects? And then when she wins, it's not really a win for strong female in elected office, because it's like after she wins, it's like, this is thanks to the great support of the people that my husband has, and that's being transferred to me. So, so I'm not in any way trying to say that this is some kind of victory for certain kind of new form of capitalism politically, right? But what I am trying to say is that the story that is typically told, right, in social scientific literature, and also by Nehru himself, by the way, that this is a party of Maharajas, Zamindars, landlords, etc., that may be where you're getting your vote banks, but if to look purely at that story would be to neglect the interesting thing which is, I think is going on, right? Of course, Swatantra's success was short-lived, and with the split in the Congress into the Indira Gandhi-led Congress R and the more conservative Congress O, many of Swatantra's supporters decamped to the Congress O. And in the 1970, including N.G. Ranga, who was the party president himself, in the 1971 elections, the party basically collapses. Some rump of it joins the BKD in like 1974. But as I mentioned earlier, the true significance was not electoral, right? What was noteworthy was that Swatantra sought no less than to lay the foundations for a two-party system and invigorate Indian democracy. And in one very small case, where Swatantra partners up with the DMK, even though the DMK was headed for a big victory, what it does is it helps move a small amount of people who are kind of on the fence but powerful toward voting for the opposition coalition, and also gives a kind of respectability in a sense to the DMK because of Rajgopalachari's friendship that he formed with Anna Durai. And of course, that's a very important election. I know people sometimes in Delhi don't read much about South India, but 1967 is a very watershed year, and after that the Congress never came back in my beloved home state. So, unlike the communists or the ethno-nationalist Bharatiya Janasangh, forerunners of today's BJP, the other opposition parties of the left and the right respectively, right, Swatantra considered democracy an end in itself. And I'm not saying that communists should not behave democratically, but what I'm saying is that the ultimate aim is the dissolution of the state, right, if you have to go in terms of stages of history, right. And similarly, the Bharatiya Janasangh wanted to bring about some sort of ancient polity of 100 Mahajanapadas, and its successor has spoken of Vipaksh Mukh Bharat. So the communists were, as we said, interested in the issue of the state, but Swatantra was committed to multi-party democracy, but not as a progressive multi-party democracy, right? To its leaders, democracy was a form of government that ought to bring stability, ensured by a kind of imagined, right? When I deal with some of the issues of the limitations of this imaginary, right? Imagined middle-class constituency and an opposition that checked the power of the dominant party. So, what contributions does this book offer? Hopefully, that is for all of you bright students or CPS to agree or disagree, or but here's what I think. Okay? So, first, the point was to reveal that in the heyday of the Nehruvian state, there exist powerful and politically organized constituencies for alternate market-friendly policy. Swatantra was not just about Maharajas and Zamindars, right? And by making a careful study of the regional and caste context in which free economy and opposition politics emerged, the hope is that you will reconsider some received wisdom about India's post-colonial history. Second, to try to show that despite India's formal non-alignment during the Cold War, right, there is a pitched battle of ideas, of hearts and minds, taking place between the Indian anti-communist print culture and a more popular left-leaning literature, which we cannot simply reduce to the demands or the designs of the superpowers. It's not that anybody who is writing pro-Soviet Union is on the take from the CPI, or sorry, in Moscow, or sorry, not CPI in Moscow, the CPI, and ultimately from whatever CPSU, or similarly, we assume that whoever is like writing pro-American stuff is on the take of the CIA. In fact, the American ambassador becomes so frustrated with Minu Masani, who is the sort of general secretary of the Swatantra party, because he says, look, his hatred of Nehru is so much that we can't even have a reasonable discussion, because by this time Nehru has dismissed the communist government in 1959 in Kerala, and so the Americans are not really worried that Nehru is a communist, but Masani is very worried that Nehru might be moving towards communism, right? So third, moving beyond South Asia, right, the book tries to rewrite the history of economic thought as a history of economic and political consciousness and communication rather than theory. Right? And to do so, I try to consult an extensive archive of print and visual culture. Finally, the book shows how local ideologies about political economy developed, inflected by colonial era practices and ideologies, regional trends, and contact with the rhetoric of the outside world. I try to offer a perspective on the market turn in the second half of the 20th century from the perspective of a non-Western society and its concerns. So I conclude by saying a few words about kind of what we may take from this history for our present, without trying to deify or fetishize Swatantra, which I have no sort of stake in doing. As it is, I'm like an ABCD anyway. So there are sort of possibilities. First, the possibilities for decentralization and regional economic and linguistic autonomy in a federal polity that has seen a trend of rapid increasing centralization over the last decade and the return of one language, one nation discourse. Okay. Second, Swatantra's critique of vested interests. C. Rajgopalachari, who co-founded the Swatantra Party, coined the term permit license quota Raj, permit license Raj, to mean, as sometimes forgotten today, an oligarchic coalition between the dominant party, the bureaucrats who distribute the permits and licenses of the economy, and big business who fill the coffers of the party in power. Now, of course, there was a tone of hyperbole in Rajgopalachari's critique. He had a lot of personal bitterness, and if you're interested in going down that rabbit hole, I have footnotes that you can talk about that, and we can even chat about it later on. But there was also a grain of truth. as the Mahalanobis Committee report of the 1964 and the Hazari Committee report of the 1967 point found out. Right? So in India today, and I would commend to you the special issue of seminar that was edited by Rohit Chandra, I believe, co-edited by Rohit Chandra, I believe, Rahul Verma, I don't know, other editor. Regional capital has been weakened as a few conglomerates close to the government have prospered widely. Right? Caps on corporate donations to political parties have been eliminated. Tax-free electoral bonds that allow anonymous donations have been introduced to benefit one party especially. And so I would suggest that Swatantra's critique of oligarchy is a powerful one that reverberates to the present. Third, like their contemporaries in the Congress, Swatantra leaders saw themselves as peer educators as well, and they did much to try to elevate the level of public discourse. Right? The idea is to get citizens to reason, right, rather than to passively accept what they said, even though the kind of target citizen that they sort of presumed was someone who was perhaps not as common as they thought. And finally, Swatantra was of a party full of people who had been Gandhians at one time, who embraced a particular kind of unity and diversity. It was not divorced in many cases from religion, but was certainly accommodating of multiple religions. General Secretary Masani, as I detail in the book, refused to make an alliance with one of the other parties because he found it to be fascistic. The party managed to keep its majoritarian elements, of which there were some, and I don't sort of soft pedal that. Munshi is a member of this party. Right? He's there at the first meeting of the BHP. I would argue it doesn't have that much to do with the party's day-to-day. But the party, and again, this is not unlike the Congress at the time. There are all kinds of interests in the Congress as a sort of Big Ten party. But Swatantra manages to broadly keep these tendencies in check, and the party ideology and all that is quite free from these sorts of things. And certainly in its activities, it isn't willing to make certain kinds of alliances at times. Majoritarianism does not end up featuring very prominently in its activities, I would suggest. So I would kind of conclude with the fact that the point that projects like Swatantra can help us imagine alternative possibilities and solidarities to check the worst excesses of the present, even if they stand far apart from what we may consider to be our utopias. Thank you.